Hello everyone, JinJinx here, one of the Monster Hunter math guys. So, the Iceborne beta with Volcana fightable in it is now over and it was a very fun time. And we only have a few days left until Iceborne comes out. And as you are probably aware from our previous videos covering the skills changes they're bringing with Iceborne, your builds are going to have to change if you want to still be dealing max deeps. Now, originally we only thought this was going to be for Iceborne, but Capcom is going to be dropping a patch the day before Iceborne on base Monster Hunter World covering these skill changes. So let's talk about these changes and what our builds are going to have to look like post-change. But before we get too deep into that, quick reminder, we do have a Twitter and Tuna does have a Twitch. Tuna and I are equal business partners and we do split everything, so following us on Twitter and following Tuna over on Twitch is one of the best ways to help support us absolutely for free. And Tuna will be live on Twitch as soon as this video goes out, so be sure to go check him out. Also, just another quick reminder, blooper at the end of each video now, so enjoy that. Alright, let's start off by briefly covering the skills changes. Now, we've already discussed these in depth in previous videos, but let's briefly cover them just to contextualize the build changes we're going to discuss. So, the most important one is that Max Might is basically useless unless you hit level 5 of it. So, builds are basically going to run 0 Max Might or 5 Max Might with pretty much no in between. Pretty much the only exceptions to this will probably be Light Bogan, because Light Bogan can avoid monster attacks without having to roll. And then you can potentially run Max Might on runs where you'll be flinch locking or trip locking a monster, but that's more speedrunning territory. Also, another development with Max Might is we don't know for certain whether the 4th and 5th levels will be available at launch. It's been confirmed that several skills do have increased levels, but they're attached to a set bonus. So we don't know for certain if Max Might having a 4th and 5th level is attached to a set bonus or not. My educated guess is that it's not, just because they spoke about it in the developer diary, so it wouldn't make sense for them to not mention it's attached to a set bonus. But again, we're not certain, so keep that in mind. Now, Crit Eye also got buffed rather significantly. Instead of having the weird 3, 6, 10% affinity for the first 3 levels, every single level gives you exactly 5% Crit Eye. And then the max level at Crit Eye 7 gives you plus 10% affinity for a total of 40% affinity. Very nice. The other change is that Agitator's affinity got buffed for level 1 but got nerfed for every higher level. The affinity is now 5, 5, 7, 7, and 10 for all 5 levels. I assume this is to counteract the fact that with the new Clutch Claw mechanics you can very quickly enrage a monster. But I also didn't really see it as necessary because every single monster in the game you could trigger the enrage after you rolled their roar, so you already could instantly enrage them. Either way, not a huge deal. It does limit the sources of affinity we have for high negative affinity weapons, but And now Weakness Exploit no longer gives you the full effect unless the monster part you are hitting is softened. Now, as I mentioned before, this doesn't really change that much unless your runs are unclean. And for the sake of builds, it's better to just assume the 50% affinity still. But it does mean if you're running a low unit of White Sharpness Master's Touch build with 100% affinity on softened monster parts, that if your run isn't very clean, you probably need to run more handicraft. Alright, let's talk about how the builds will look now. So here's the thing. The Max Might changes are really the one that's making all of these changes in the builds necessary. Max Might now no longer works well unless you run level 5 of it. And many builds run at least some levels of Max Might. So now these same builds have to either figure out a way to become not dependent on Max Might, or they have to figure out a way to fit level 5 Max Might. Now let's do a quick calculation. So, Weakness Exploit gives us 50% affinity, Crit Eye 7 gives us 40% affinity, and Attack Boost 4 gives us plus 5 affinity. This totals out to a nice 95% affinity. An Agitator can give us an extra 5 to 10% affinity when the monster is enraged. However, Agitator 5 is the only one that gives us 10% affinity, and it's pretty hard to fit that into a build. So one Agitator level for 5% affinity is probably the most reliable one we can call on. This puts us at an even 100% affinity that can go up to 110 or 115 if you throw in some affinity augments. This means that we can reliably get a 0% affinity weapon to 100% without using Max Might. And if we're willing to commit up to 2 affinity augments to the weapon, we can get up to a negative 15% weapon to 100% affinity. Now, running a Metahemoth set with either the Deviljho variation of your weapon or a natural white sharpness 0% affinity version like the Ruin or a KT Sleep version for example is meta for pretty much every weapon in the game. Now for the Deviljho variations of weapons, the problem is they all have negative 25% affinity with the exception of the SNS which is negative 20%. This leaves us with 2 options when it comes to Deviljho weapons. The first option is to run 5 max might for that 40% affinity. This loses us some efficiency so we can no longer fit attack boost 4 into the build. But because that 5 max might functions like the old max might, it's still very usable. Now the 2 vitality decos in here are just placeholders. This set does have 2 open level 1 decos for you to use. The highest damage option will be 2 attack boost decos for 6 more true raw. Alternatively, you could throw in 2 more crit eye decos that have 15% more affinity over cap just to cover you if you whiff a weak point or don't hit something softened. But yeah, this is the option to go with if you still want to hit that nice juicy 100% affinity for infinite sharpness. Plus you get to have a health augment still if you enjoy using that. Ignore the EFR and affinity on the right side here, Honey's builder still hasn't updated for these new Iceborne changes. If you're curious, the actual EFR of this build is 530.38 once max might is active. Now your other option is to just not run max might. With 2 affinity augments and agitator 3, we can hit 92% affinity with agitator active on this build. Again, the actual affinity on the side is not accurate, and it does drop down to 85% when agitator isn't active. Now at 92% affinity, that's 375 hits until you hit blue on average. And with 85% affinity without agitator active, that's going to be 200 hits until you hit blue on average. That is enough to kill a thing, and also the EFR is higher at 543.53 with agitator active. The only problem is it has no flexibility for any utility skills you might want to have for tackling Iceborne, and you don't get to use health augment. When you run health augment instead of an affinity augment, you're losing another 5% affinity. Which is when things start to get sketchy, because at 80% affinity without agitator active, you only have 150 hits on average until you hit blue sharpness. And at 87% affinity with agitator active, you only have 230 hits until you hit blue. The EFR also drops rather noticeably. However, it's not reliant on max might, so that's a thing to consider as well. Now the other option, and in my opinion the far more preferable one, is using your 0% affinity natural white sharpness options. For most weapons, the best option for this is going to be the Ruin version of your weapon. Again, numbers aren't correct on the side, this is exactly 100% affinity with agitator active post Iceborne. Now some weapons will run a non-elemental boost KT version instead, like the Sleep Hammer for example, so you just drop those 2 agitator and slot a non-elemental boost instead. All of those kinds of weapons have a natural 30 units of white sharpness, so the 95% affinity is plenty. But the nice thing about this build is it works with pretty much any 0% affinity weapon in the game. The charm is flexible. Here we have attack boost 3 because it's what gives the highest damage output, but you can run health boost instead if you like, or run handicraft if your weapon needs it. Or you can even run an agitated charm if you want to hit that 100% affinity and don't have the slottage that Ruin has. And this particular setup with agitator active does hit 547.01 EFR, which is the highest on this list. Plus it has blast damage. Neato. So while the Deviljho versions will be better against monsters weak to dragon, this is gonna be your go-to for just general stuff most likely. So these 2 builds cover most everything that needs to change. Weapons that don't use max might, like bow and dual blades, won't really change that much. Now these both are elemental weapons, and they are raising the elemental caps in Iceborne. But also both of these weapons are getting nerfed in terms of the elemental modifiers on their attacks, so we're gonna wait until post Iceborne to actually talk about how they changed. Too many numbers variables we don't know the specifics of yet. And as I mentioned earlier, light bowgun doesn't really change much because you rarely have to dodge with light bowgun. Now for heavy bowgun, if you're doing flinchlock runs with glutton, there's not really any changes. And clusters are getting nerfed and their ammo capacity is halved in terms of the bomb berries you can carry, so they're kinda dead. But if you're looking for a glutton set that does not use any max might, this is the one you want to go for. This actually does hit 100% affinity because Crit I4 gives you 20% affinity in Iceborne. And if you want to use different ammo types, you can pretty much use this as a template for those. Just swap out the gun. Now another one that does need to change is Charge Blade. Now unfortunately both the Protective Polish as well as the Handicraft Charge Blade sets don't really work anymore. You can't really fit Max Might 5 into them, and Max Might is innate in the armor pieces used in the sets, so yeah, rip those. However, the No Handicraft set works just fine running Max Might 5. You basically sub out 2 crit boosts for 2 Max Mights. And yes, we do know that Artillery 5 is going to be a thing in Iceborne. But also, as far as we are aware, it is going to be attached to a set bonus, so we won't have access to it immediately. Now your other option, which is looking a lot better than it did previously, is going back to the old school Razor Sharp build. It does have 3 less true raw as well as lower affinity and lower EFR, but it has a lot more sharpness, twice as much in fact. Now I have not gone through looking at the sharpness breakpoints to figure out which one works better than the other given the different amount of sharpness used like I did with previous Charge Blade sets, so let's just say leave it up to preference. That being said, you may want to look into using Pep CBs instead because they gain the most damage out of the elemental attack changes. But I'm not going to cover all of those builds because you literally just run the Kjar Ice set for every single one and switch the elemental decos. They all can use elemental 5 attack now and you want to on Pep CBs. Finally, the last one we want to cover that did change is going to be Greatsword. So with the buff to Crit I7 as well as Agitator 1, this build does hit 95% affinity with Agitator active. And at least for the moment on Greatsword, that's the best you're gonna get. Greatsword along with Lance are the 2 weapons that in our opinion you have to run a health augment on. For both of them, your primary defensive mechanic causes you to take chip damage, which has to be healed up somehow. Now the handicraft jewel we have in here is pretty much filler. The extra handicraft is nice because of the lower affinity, it does give you more sharpness to work with. But if you prefer, you can switch it out for a focus deco or another agitator deco or heck even an attack boost. Alright, that should cover pretty much everything. Now I know I did not cover any gun lance builds and that's because they frankly barely changed and there are so many to cover. And not even all of them run max might, and the ones that do only run like 1 or 2 points of it so you can throw in some crit eye instead and it pretty much covers the difference. But covering gun lance builds would literally double the builds I'm covering in this video. Sorry not sorry. But either way, thank you so much for watching the video. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like the video and let us know in a comment what you think about these new sets. If you're looking for some like-minded hunters to hunt with, either before or during Iceborne, or you just want some peeps to chat with, be sure to check out our Discord server, the Mathalos Nest. And don't forget, we do have a Twitter where we post updates about videos and various other things, and then Tuna does also have a Twitch. He streams there almost every single day, and with Iceborne coming out, you can bet there will be a bunch of streams. Thank you as always to Honey over at honeyhunterworld.com for creating and maintaining the tools we use to make all of our sets with. And of course, none of this would be possible without the generosity of our patrons. Now, the patrons have spoken and you all seem to agree that our patron callouts at the end of every video is a little excessive. So we're gonna be doing a new thing. At the end of each video, we're going to mention the Patreon and mention any new patrons we have had since the last video. And then once a month, at the beginning of each month, we'll do a full call out like we've been doing for all of the patrons for that month. So for this video, I'll be doing a full call out for the month of August, but don't expect a new one until September ends. So, an especially huge thank you to Foray, Yoshi Cho, Flight, David Sternberg, XCLK07, Holcanis, Gilgi, David Zhu Sinclair, John Cohen, Sinful by Nature, Warren Kios, Hensatsuken, Papa Slatch, Woodmanticore, Captain Big Brain, Milky Powder, Superfly, Bram Orsel, Roddy Raw Dog, Anti-Spartan, Lightweight, Javik, The Local, Lost and Confused, PB Livingston, Flaggle Blast, Jordan Petit, Skylar Yang, Miguel Lopez, Mongus, Kumiko, Triple Agents, Caracas, Zarashi, Ryan Gates, Alan O'Dom, Baguette, Zimv, Sir Kite, Brew, Billy Barthol, Mally, Yordi Cosmopara, Ramos, Dandy, Captain Walmart, Magister Obscura, Jamie, and every single one of you who supports us on Patreon. Now, I really personally like doing these long callouts at the end of each video because I want to show my appreciation to all of you who help support us. But evidently even you think this is excessive, so moving forward we'll be doing these once a month instead. But either way, thank you so much for your support because it really does mean the world to us. Alright, that's all we got for this video. We do have a few more pre-Iceborne videos coming out for you guys before it drops on Friday. So if you want to see any of those videos as soon as they come out, or you'd like to see me stream on YouTube as soon as Iceborne comes out on Friday, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and YouTube will let you know as soon as any of those videos go out. Happy hunting, hunters. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye. Pepsi Bees look to gain the most damage out of the elemental attack challenges. Changes.